Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is Discover a World Apart on our Madagascar Wildlife Adventure. And it will be presented by our fabulous NatHab Expedition Leader, Matt Meyer. Matt, it is so good to see you again. Thank you for being here today and for taking us with you to the amazing Madagascar.
Thanks, Sunny. Great to be back again, as always. These webinars, as I've said time and time again, have been a great way to connect with you all and to share a lot of our passion. And what better way to do so than to let some of you know who might have signed up for this trip, what it is to expect, and those that are interested, hopefully to further entice you and to get you to sign up. So welcome, yeah. Thanks all for tuning in. So Madagascar, it's a place like no other that I've ever guided before. The biodiversity there is ridiculous. It's off the charts. We've got a high level of endemism percentage-wise in overall species than anywhere else in the world, higher than the Pantanal, Amazon, higher than Central African rainforests. So percentage-wise, not total number of species, but percentage-wise, there are more endemics found in Madagascar than anywhere else in the world. I started guiding here in 2017, and I was running 5 or 6 trips a year before COVID, and then we weren't able to get back onto the island until 2020, mid 2022, and that time frame, it allowed us as a team at NatHab to really fulfill one of our core ideologies of empowering local people. And so now the majority of the team that are expedition leaders in Madagascar are our former local guides who have then been trained up to be phenomenal expedition leaders. I'm really excited to get back. I don't get to go as often as I used to. I guide now once or twice a year, special photo trips or special departures, and I'll be going back there in October and then again next year in about August or so. But to kick off, first and foremost, NatHab partnership with the WWF, as a lot of you will know, we've been now over 20 years partnered with the WWF, and it is conservation through exploration. So going to places around the world, exploring them, and in doing so, helping to conserve these places. And there are very few that are as needed of that as Madagascar. The latest, or the most recent survey, I think, was done in about 2015 or so, and we're looking at about 3.5% remains of intact natural ecosystems and habitats as to what was before human habitation. So a really, really conservation hotspot is Madagascar, and our trips, like everywhere else in the world that we run trips, are crucially important in preserving these habitats. So to kick off, this is me being silly. These are all photos taken in Madagascar. If you look at the photo on the left-hand side there, if you look at that stick in the middle, there's kind of like a round thing about a third of the way up from the bottom. That's a mossy leaf-tailed gecko, and that is me being an idiot, showing how surprised I am. I wasn't surprised, I knew where it was, to see this little creature, and I'll have a look at a photo of one of them a little bit later. So Madagascar was a puzzle piece wedged against the east coast of Africa. Now, often described as the 8th continent. It's one of the largest islands in the world. It's a continental island, so it wasn't created through volcanic movement or anything like that. It was actually part of continent, and it broke off when one of the shelves separated from mainland Africa. And then to give you an understanding of the scale of things and where our trip goes, these are the locations that our traditional trip goes to, or we visit, with the addition of one other in our photo departures starting next year in 2025. So that size, you're looking at about the size of California from north to south, and then a little bit wider from east to west. You've got the Mozambican Channel on the western side, which separates Madagascar from continental Africa. And then as you move east, the closest thing then is going to be Southeast Asia and Australia through the Indian Ocean. So the east coast, temperate or a tropical rainforest, and then the west coast being dry, deciduous, open grassland and forests, and a lot drier. So the regions that we visit, we start in the heart of the country in the city of Antananarivo, shortened nicknamed Tana, and that means the city of 1,000. It was where one of the old kingdoms, the king and the capital essentially was, and that is where we start. It's the capital city where the main hub is to fly into and out of, and from there we we spend a night, we head east and this is something that I'll reiterate several times throughout the presentation, is that the distances in Madagascar are not like anywhere else that you would be used to in the United States or in other African countries, where we don't go by distance, we go by time that it takes. So a drive that, like the drive from Tana to Mantadia, it's only about 180 kilometers, so call it 110 or so miles, but it's about a 6-hour drive. The roads are tough and tricky at times. For the most part, those are all tarred roads. But if you get stuck behind a truck going up a mountain pass, it can take a bit of time. So the drives are long, but the reason we drive a lot of the time is so that we can see the countryside. We can stop off at local places, and then where the drive would be too long, we then hop on a private charter and fly that leg. So we go from Tana to Andisibe Mantadia National Park. We spent 3 nights there at the lovely Mantadia Lodge. I'll have a look at some of the accommodations a bit later in the presentation. We're there for 3 nights. We explore primary rainforest, which has never been logged, never been had anything removed from it, and secondary rainforest, which is rehabilitated and regrown forest after it was traditionally logged. And we spend 3 nights there exploring that region, our first rainforest. And from there, we head back to Tana. We hop on a plane and we head down to Fiana Ransua. And then we hop on our shuttle and we head into the rainforest of Raramafana, where we spend 2 nights. And then from Raramafana, we do a beautiful, one of my favorite days on the trip. We go from Raramafana down to Isalu, where we spend a few days exploring the sandstone massive of the Isalu Massive. And in that drive, we go from rainforest to essentially like Southwest United States, deserts, big rock cliffs, beautiful colors. And the main reason, or one of the main reasons for that drive, because we leave it after breakfast and we get in just before dinner, is an amazing community-run project, and it's the exact halfway point where this community of about 50 or so locals discovered a pocket of about a 30 or 40 acre forest that was remained and intact, interspersed by all of the rice paddies where everything had been cleared. Because Madagascar's biggest issue is deforestation. So extreme poverty pushes deforestation for agriculture, and that then leads to obviously the natural environment taking a backseat to human survival. So these guys discovered this little pocket of about 30 or so acres, and they said, no, we're going to conserve this. We're going to conserve these lemurs. There were about 50 or so lemurs that were remaining, ringtail lemurs that remained in the forest. And they've grown that to being about 500 or so community members. And we're looking at, when I was there last year, we're about just shy of 400 or so individuals ring-tailed lemurs, and the population has grown. The community that is sustained by it and benefits from this perfect example of community conservation is just it's something that we can't miss, and so that's why we do that drive. But anyway, we get down to Isalu. We spend 3 nights there. We explore Isalu National Park in the huge, big sandstone cliffs of the Isalu Massif, and then we also explore Zombitsi National Park, which is a dry deciduous forest. And then from there, we take a hop on a charter plane from Isalu back up to Tana to refuel, grab a bite to eat, and then we head up to Njajave, which is where we spend our last 3 nights. The beautiful oasis, which is also a WWF incentive project where they've conserved a massive piece of land, and then the reserve or lodge is responsible for the conservation of a core game reserve or a core reserve, essentially. And there they've got a FUSA reintroduction program. They've got an II program. They've got the fat-tailed dwarf lemur studies going on with Duke University, which is one of the big moving parts in terms of research that's going into lemur biodiversity, because they're just over 100 or so, 115 existing species of lemur, and every couple of years they'll either discover one or they'll realize that this isn't one species, but it should be 2 species. So there's a significant amount of research going on still in Madagascar, and one of the places, or 2 of the places that we visit, Ranamafana, where there is an actual center called Valbayu that was started by researchers from Duke University, and then Njajave, where they've got a research team there doing research and studies on their lemurs and lemur populations in the surrounding areas. So that's a brief overview of the trip on the whole. This is what everyone thinks of when they think of Madagascar. I'm not going to lie, it was often what I thought of when I first thought of Madagascar. Not far from the truth. You've got King Julian there, who's a ring-tailed lemur, and his little sidekick, he's actually an II. And then all of the little guys in the background could represent an individual from each of the 115 or so species that are remaining. But they don't sing and they don't dance as much as they do in the movie. And they're not friends with lions and giraffe and any of that kind of stuff. This is true Madagascar. So a beautiful family of ring-tailed lemurs up in the top left there. The tiered rice paddies of the Central Highland area outside of Ranamafana, with a lot of rainfall, very fertile lands, and most of the subsistence farming is done in these little surrounding communities and villages. Smiling locals as we're driving around. Everyone's happy. Everyone's always jovial, or most Malagasy are. The sunset at the pool at Njajave with beautiful palm trees, and then the world's heaviest chameleon, the Parsons chameleon. This guy is in an area that we have special access to at night. It's an arboretum that's only open to the day, but through our negotiations with locals and our ongoing commitment to community conservation, we've been able to talk them into letting us in at night, and then we get to try and see these guys here. And this Parsons chameleon, it's about this big. It weighs about, I'd say, just shy of 2 pounds. So biggest chameleon in the world, or heaviest chameleon in the world. The biggest is, we'll see a little bit later, it's called the Austerlitz, and that's about that long. It's about, you're looking at about almost 3 feet long from the tip of the tail to the tip of the tongue. So some big guys there. The biodiversity, as I mentioned, is pretty ridiculous. And then driving through the countryside, there's a lot of areas are certainly on the east, makes you feel, if you've traveled anywhere in Southeast Asia, you feel sort of that connection with the rice paddies, the rainforest, the heat, the humidity, the rainfall. But then as you move further west, there's more of a connection to the African heritage and roots of the people. Because Madagascar, up until about a decade ago, was thought to have only been settled by people within the last 3 or 4 thousand years. And then at around that time, they discovered some remains of it was a sloth lemur in a cave on the northeast coast that had scarifications in it, and those bones were carbon dated back to about 9,500 years ago. And people first arrived from the Southeast Asian islands, sort of Borneo, Sumatra, that area. And then as the years progressed, people came in from Africa across the Mozambican Channel. So let's talk about lemurs for a second, if we haven't already. And then I'm going to do my best for any of you who have been a part of any of my webinars. I tend to waffle and talk and talk and talk and talk and leave about 3 minutes for Sunny to run through 500 questions. I already have a couple of things here that I'm going to try and cover for the duration of the trip. But for now, let's look at these guys. So the common brown lemur on the left, and then the Zumbitsi sportive lemur on the right. The common brown lemur, they're my favorite. They are common. We see them in 3 or 4 of the places that we visit. They're brown. They're not colorful. They're about this big, but they are so comical, so expressive, and just the coolest little guys. They really are. For anyone that after you've seen them, you're going to go, I know exactly what Matt's talking about. And they're nicknamed the pig lemur because they make these cute little sort of, they sound like little piglets walking through, and they talk to each other, and they squeal and they jump. So one of the things that you'll see with a lot of the pictures of lemurs is that it always looks like they're kind of doing this. They look very surprised all the time. And when any of you visit Madagascar and you watch lemurs, they don't move. Their head has to move where their focus moves because their eyes are fixed in their eye sockets. They don't have oscillating eyes like we do. And so they've always got this kind of surprised look on their faces. So another key species that we look for in the Mantadia rainforest is this is the Indri, which is the largest living lemur. They make a massive, loud, whooping call that almost sounds like a whale crossed with a rhino, crossed with it. Just this. I'm not going to make it now, but it's a very sort of howler monkey-ish sound that resonates through the rainforest early in the morning. And these guys, they're about sort of that one that's sitting down. You're looking at about this big, so about the size of my torso, maybe a little bit taller. And if you were to stretch the legs out, they obviously sit in that crouch position most of the time, and they spring from tree to tree. A very arboreal lemur, and they don't. One of the animals that they tried to originally research in captivity, and they just don't do very well in captivity because they need a hugely variable diet every day. And so it's the largest living lemur all the way down to one of the smallest. This is one of the mouse lemur species. This guy's about this big, seen on one of our night walks, which is one of the really cool things about Madagascar that we get to do is every couple of nights, not every night because the days are long. And so we usually do it every second or third night. We'll hop out and go exploring at night looking for mouse lemurs and chameleons and geckos and all of that sort of thing. So the biggest lemur all the way down to the smallest lemur. And then several different groups of lemurs. So these are called the safakas. These are known as the dancing lemurs. So they'll hop from tree to tree, but then they'll also hop from tree down to the ground and then across the ground. And it kind of looks like they're dancing because they won't hop forwards, they hop sideways. So that would be the closest thing to I like to move it, if you were to compare it to any of them. And then obviously the iconic ringtail lemur, which everyone knows if they've heard about Madagascar or if you think about Madagascar, these guys are the ones that pop up. And these guys, we see them in the south. They are typically found in drier conditions and drier areas. And this is the most terrestrial of all of the lemur species, the most comfortable on the ground, they spend more time on the ground than they probably do in the trees compared to any of the other species. Most other lemurs will use the ground as a to get from tree to tree if there's no branches connecting them, whereas these guys will happily walk on the ground, and they meow at one another in communication. So one's walking that way, one's walking this way, and they kind of, you just see this meow, 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 meow as they're walking, and they're looking at each other. And then when they walk, their tails make little question marks. So you can see them quite cutely walking in line. These guys were surprised by a bird of prey flying up ahead, and so they all stared up there. They're all basking on this rock in the early morning in a salu until they saw this, and then they all scurried away shortly after this photo was taken. And then, as I mentioned, the chameleons. So huge biodiversity. These two here found in two very different areas: the Parsons chameleon in the rainforest, the heaviest of all of the chameleons. Then the Austerlitz, which is found in the dry deciduous forest, the longest or the biggest of the chameleons. So that tongue is this big. You're looking at about a, I don't know, 16-inch tongue, 12 to 16-inch tongue that it can shoot out and grab. This was just shooting out at a grasshopper that we sat and waited and waited and waited for him to go, and he came up closely to it. And chameleons walk in this kind of staggered back and forth, and it's to mimic the movement of leaves so that invertebrates or anything can't see them coming, but then it also mimics a leaf for defense mechanisms. So their predator, either a large bird of prey or a snake, isn't going to be able to say, oh, that's a chameleon. They think, no, it's a leaf. Don't worry about it. Let's move on and find something else. And then we've got the ultimate in stealth. So chameleons have the ability to change their color. They've got photoreceptors in the skin, and they can change the color with light. So as it gets dark at night, they turn a cream whitish color, which makes them easy to see. But in the daytime, they can use the light from the sun and actually change the different crystal layers within their skin to mimic their surroundings. These two guys look like their surroundings. So you've got the satanic leaf-tailed gecko on the left. He looks literally like a leaf. And then the mossy leaf-tailed gecko on the right, who can also change his skin a little bit, but he mimics the actual lichen and moss on the edge of a tree. Various different habitats that we'll be walking through. So primary rainforest on the left-hand side at Mantadia National Park, and then a little bit of primary and secondary rainforest at Ranamafana on the right. So rivers, rainforests, not very high elevation altitude, not enough to get altitude sickness, but certainly enough to make you have to catch your breath every now and then. And in the June, July, August months, it's typically cooler with less chance of rain. September and October, it's getting a little bit warmer, but not stiflingly hot. And then November, higher increased chance of rain, and the warmest month that we travel in. We don't travel December, January, February because of the risk of cyclones. So that's kind of the temperature or the climate range of the season that we run. But it's a rainforest. A rainforest, typically they generate their own rainfall. So you can be sitting in Ranamafana in July and it rains. It's not that it's necessarily a rainy season for anywhere in Madagascar, but if it generates its own rainfall, it can rain at any time. And then we go all the way down to the southwest, where we've got these big sandstone rocky outcrops in a very dry desert-like environment. And then all the way up to the northwest, where we are at Anjajavi, and we've got these rocks adjacent to the coast called Tsingy, which are basically it's the leftover deposits from extinct coral beds. So when Madagascar is separated from mainland Africa, it spent about, so Africa, Antarctica, India, Southeast Asia, Australia. Madagascar separated from Africa with the Indian subcontinent about 200 million years ago. And then India broke off for 180 million years ago. Then India broke off and left Madagascar about 80 million, 90 million years ago. So there hasn't been any connection with another continent or another landmass in 80 odd million years. But as that journey started to where Madagascar is situated now, the whole island kind of seesawed in and out, east and west, in and out of the ocean as it was going. And so subsequently, and then also with ice ages and movement of tectonic plates, pushing up upliftment, there are areas here like Isalu that were once underneath and under extinct seabeds. So being a part of a massive inland lake, and then when the continents divided, everything drained out, and you had this sandstone deposit that was left. So huge layers of sedimentation down in the southeast or southwest, and then the Tsingis going from water above. So you had coral that was deposited or coral that grew underneath, and then as the water level dropped and the continent or the island rose, the corals couldn't survive out of water. So you've got this limestone rock that's been weathered by rainfall and wind that's left this almost like cheese grater razor blade esque appearance. And tsingy is the shortened version of tingi tingi, which is the Malagasy expression to tippy toe, because the rocks are so sharp, you've got a tippy toe while you're walking over them. So huge variety of different areas that we are and environments that we're visiting. Then a few opportunities to do some night photography. This is down at Isalu. So obviously lunar cycles dependent. If it is a full moon, you're not going to get something like this, but this is a beautiful example of the Milky Way moving over Isalu down in the southwest. And then when we're down at Zombitsi, and then again on our photo tour for 2025, we head down to Ifati, where we get to go into the spiny forest and look at these giant baobabs. So around the world, there are 8 different species of baobab, one found in Australia, one and a subspecies or 2 found in Africa and mainland Africa, and then 5 that are endemic just to Madagascar, but they've got 6 species, which includes the African one. So a huge draw card going into the southern region to look at these baobabs. And then you've got this little day gecko. So for those of you in the United States who are familiar with gecko, the gecko gecko is actually a day gecko, not this guy. He's not going to try and sell you insurance when you are walking in the dry forest, but his cousin might. And so that's actually where the gecko gecko comes from. It's one of the giant green day geckos in Madagascar. So a varied let's say a varied menu of accommodations across the trip. For anyone that's traveled with Madagascar, you'll know this, but for those that haven't traveled or are still deciding if you want to travel, what we do is we select the best places for nature and wildlife, so the best national parks, the best regions, and that's where we visit, and then we find the best accommodations within that region and vicinity. So we're not going somewhere for the sake of this is the best lodge in Madagascar, so we're going to go there. We're going, where's the best animal viewing, and we're going to go there, and then we're going to look for the best accommodations. So they vary hugely from, but they're all extremely comfortable, and the sort of lower end of the scale of accommodations we usually don't spend as much time at. So varied from the hotel in Tana, which is changing this year. We're staying at a hotel much closer to the airport, just for convenience sake, but still, you can equate it to sort of a higher 3-star hotel. Mansadia Lodge, beautiful lodge built in an old eucalyptus grove. So eucalyptus trees were brought over by the French to be planted and used for timber, charcoal production, and building materials, etc., so that locals wouldn't have to cut down the hardwoods so that they could use them and take them back to France to make their furniture. So this eucalyptus forest was cut down. Eucalyptus is an invasive in Madagascar. It's not native. It's from Australia. And they then built this beautiful lodge on top of this hill. So that's our first stop there is Mansadia Lodge. From there, we then head down to the town of Ranamafana, where we'll stay at one of the 2 lodges at the bottom of the page, either at Seatam Lodge, which is on the right, or Thermal Lodge, which is on the left. Very comfortable. These are the 2 that are probably of the lower end, but we're only spending 2 nights there. And the rainforest that we're visiting there is spectacular. It's where the Duke University Lima study program is going on. And that's one of the things that we go there for, is to possibly go and speak to some researchers and learn a lot more about research and that for lemurs in Madagascar. Then down in the southwest, we either stay at Relais de Lorraine or Jardin de Roy. The brother and sister properties right next to each other. And this is one of the most architecturally pleasing accommodations anywhere in Africa that I've stayed at, anywhere in the world that I've actually stayed at, where if you are 200 meters away looking straight at it, you can barely see it because the architecture blends in with the surroundings and the use of natural sandstone and rock. And here we're there for 3 nights. And it's a beautiful, beautiful area in amongst the rocks in this little oasis of a garden with some native and some obviously some bougainvilleas there, non-native species, but a great place to spend 3 nights down in the dry southwest. And then we finish off at the spectacular Anjajave, where we are in rosewood bandas right on the beach. They've got, I think there are about 18 or 20 rooms, maybe 22 rooms in the whole lodge. And these guys have got that 2,000 acre Heart Reserve and then a protected area of about 20,000 acres. These are the guys that work closely with the WWF. They've got the FUSA reintroduction. They've got all of those programs that are ongoing. And it's a beautiful place to stay and to end the trip. The photo of those palm trees, that's an iPhone photo off the pool at the main deck. It's just, yeah, I mean, you can't really say much more about that. It's pretty spectacular. And some of the environments that we'll be trekking in, so you can see sort of scale and proximity there. That's a Safaka, and that's Lalana, one of our now local expedition leaders, taking a photograph. Because these animals evolved without the threat of humans, and they've only had humans around for sort of 8,000 or 9,000 years ago. There's very little fear that the animals have of people. So sometimes they jump right over your head. Sometimes they'll hop in between the group. They really don't fear us. They're just more a little bit cautious of bumping into us because we're a lot bigger than them. So proximity for photographic equipment. You're looking at, you could have lemurs within 6 to 8 feet, but you could also be photographing lemurs at 30 or 40 feet away at the top of a tree. Not because it's scared of us, but that's because that's where it's feeding. So a very varied scale of photographic ranges. So good for anyone that is bringing telephoto equipment or anything more than your phone. Something with a bit of a zoom, something sort of a 100 to 400 mm lens, or a bridge camera with anything up to about a 600 mil zoom function would be good. And then something that's versatile with low light and high light. So a lot of the times, especially the first two places in the rainforest, we're looking at shooting in low light conditions a lot of the time, and so something that's capable of shooting in that, either a camera body that's capable of using a high ISO, or a lens that has a low f-stop function, like a 2.8 or even a 4 f4 lens should do the trick. Then, just a couple of other species of lemur that we can encounter. So this is one of the rarest lemurs in the world. This is the bamboo lemur. We've got the greater bamboo lemur on the left-hand side, and they've got a research project there trying to reintroduce them into local areas. And these guys can only live in forests where there's the presence of bamboo, which is high elevation. So high elevation rainforest, which is in Ranamafana, is where we find these guys. And then a couple of cute pictures of some ringtail lemurs, let's have a look at that one for a little bit longer. This is the guy that was looking up at one of those, a bird of prey circling up above. So I've been given a couple of questions ahead of time just to go over, because these are often questions that are asked on the first night at the welcome dinner, and then I've also got a couple of other key points to talk about. So there is internet and Wi-Fi available at almost every single lodge. Some of it is only in the main areas, some of it is in the rooms, but a lot of it is going to be cellular Wi-Fi. So there's going to be no fiber Wi-Fi with high speeds or anything, but certainly enough to send a WhatsApp or an iMessage, download an email, something like that, keep in touch. For emergencies and things, we have the ability with sat phones, with having local operators to talk to and communicate with. So if anyone needs to get hold of you from home, they can get hold of you through us if they can't get hold of you directly. But there is internet and Wi-Fi. If anyone is interested in getting a local SIM card, that is something that can be arranged on arrival. Just talk to the local guide when you arrive and just say, I'd like to get a local SIM. It's a very easy thing that can be done at the airport or just down the road from one of the hotels that we stay at in Tana. Electricity and charging, they're running off of 220 to 240 volts. And there's it's a 3-prong adapter that is used, or 3-prong and a 2-prong adapter that's used in Madagascar. The 2 circular prong, it's not the flat prong that you've got in the States. But all rooms in all of the lodges either have an adapter built in, or they have an adapter that you can borrow to plug in, and they all have charging in the room, and it's all 220 to 240. As with all NatHab trips, gratuity and money, you don't have to carry excessive amounts of money around with you. All of the gratuities for all of the local staff, all of the local guides, drivers, etc. That's all included, or at least then you can sort that out on credit card after the trip has been run, so you don't have to worry about carrying big amounts of cash around. But if you want to exchange some cash for local currency, as you're there at the airport is probably the best place to do it. So on arrival, you'll see the local guide, he'll have a sign NatHab, just say, I've got some money I want to exchange, and that can be done right there and then at the airport. Exclusions and inclusions, as with NatHab trips, pretty much everything is included, except in Madagascar, we aren't able to include things like beers and wine and pretty much alcohol. It's just part of the thing that we can't do in Madagascar with the accommodations. But everything else is included along the way, unless it's otherwise specified by the expedition leader at the welcome dinner and presentation. Passports, you need it when you arrive, you'll need it when you leave. Just make sure that you keep it in a safe place. Most of the rooms do have safes for your passport and valuable. You don't have to carry it around with you the whole time. And then laundry, every accommodation does offer a laundry service. The one place that it is really tough to do laundry is Ranamafana, just because it is humid year round. So usually what I recommend is for guests to try and do a load of laundry at the first place at Mantadia Lodge, and then do another load at Relais de Lorraine. And that's all included throughout, with the exception of Anjajavi, where you pay for your own laundry. Trekking poles, we do provide trekking poles for anyone that wants them in country. So you don't have to bring your own with, but if you've got your preferred stick and you want to use that, and then you're more than welcome to bring that with. They usually don't weigh too much, so weight is not that much of an issue. Flashlights at night, a headlamp is always a great thing because you can pop on your head and you don't have to worry about holding it. And we will probably do at least 3 or 4 night walks over the duration. Luggage is something that anywhere in Africa, it's always a tricky subject to talk about, or to get an understanding of. We usually recommend, what we're recommending, and what you're given in your pre-departure briefing, is the maximum that is allowed with the minimum flexibility. So sometimes they weigh the bags when they pop them onto the plane, sometimes they don't. So the times they do, they stick to the restrictions that we've given you. Then obviously sometimes when they don't, we don't know, but we'll only know that, we'll only be told that as we're arriving at the charter. But it's typically, we stick to in the 44-pound limit, and that's a cumulative weight. So that's the weight of your duffel bag, as well as your carry-on or camera bag. Now, because it is a round trip, it's a start and end in Tana. If you arrive and you've got a bag that doesn't meet the requirements, because you can't have anything in no hard suitcases, no hard shell, has to be soft duffel. You can have a duffel with wheels that has a frame, but it has to be a soft-sided duffel just to fit into the planes that we use. If you arrive and you've got a 50-pound hard bag because you're doing a month-long trip, your expedition leader is going to ask you to repack that into another bag to be able to take with, and your big bag can stay in Tana. We can sort out luggage holding while we're there, so that you don't have to lug it with, or you can't lug it with, and then you can pick it up on the way back for whatever travel you're doing before or after the trip. But all of that stuff will be covered by the expedition leader at the opening welcome dinner. Bathroom stops, it's a very third world country. This is something that often concerns a lot of people. We stop as often as we can, but sometimes it's a very limited or a very not great sort of truck stop or gas station stop. And so, but we do always, like our accommodations, we stop at the best available facility that we can. But it's not like we're driving through the savannah and we've got to stop behind a tree every day. But sometimes that might be it. And then rooming and things like that, the guests, the group will always typically be allocated to a specific area of the camp or of the lodge. And some areas, some of the lodges have got lots of stairs going up and down. Anyone with mobility issues, and that goes, like saying, with the dietary requirements, mobility requirements, anything like that, we just need to know in advance, and we can typically make adjustments for that. But physical ability for a trip like this, if you can't climb up a flight of stairs to go to your hotel room, you probably shouldn't be trekking in Madagascar, because some of the treks can be 3 or 4 hours long through pretty thick vegetation, and sometimes it's raining, so it's muddy, it's slippery. So that's why this is rated as sort of moderate to hard trip. I often equate Madagascar to gorilla trekking in Uganda or Rwanda. It's about the same level of physical ability. So yeah, I've given Sunny 10 minutes here, I'm actually just going to go quickly over 2 or 3 things on my list that I didn't go over, and then I'll hand over to Sunny for some questions while you have a look at this very nice and warm basking ringtail lemur. So we've had a few pre-questions. So malaria prophylactics, I'm not a doctor, I can't say yes or no. Madagascar is a malaria area, so any time of year, your risk is whatever you're comfortable with. So if you're not comfortable with taking a risk of malaria, take an antimalarial prophylactics. I cannot tell you not to. I cannot tell you to. So it's completely up to you. However, if you take them, you start feeling adverse reactions, then you kind of need to weigh up the what's worse, having something that I might not catch, or ruining a trip because I'm feeling ill. So antimalarial prophylactics, speak to your travel doctor, and it's definitely something that a lot of people do take. I would say the majority of people do take. As expedition leaders, we can't always take it, so don't run on what we're doing. But it is a malaria risk area. And then in the rainforests, certain areas when it is really wet, you can find leeches, especially in Ranamafana and in Mansadia, the primary forest. So if you've got leech socks or leech gaiters, that's where you'll be using them. But it is typically only when it is wet, damp, moist. So if you're there and there hasn't been rain for a couple of days, you're not going to find too many leeches, and they are typically in the leaf litter and underneath the leaves above. So if it starts to rain, you can have leeches dropping down into the floor. But as long as you're not lying on the floor, rolling around, or spending time sitting down, typically if you've got your leech gaiters or leech socks on, you should be good. Footwear, something with a bit of ankle support. You don't have to necessarily bring a full-scale hiking boot because those do weigh a lot. And you certainly don't need knee-high waterproof boots, but something with decent ankle support, a Gore-Tex hiking shoe or a hiking boot that's a bit lightweight. And a recommendation is, when coming on this trip, is to wear those shoes on the international flight, your preferred shoe on the international flight over from wherever you're coming from home. Because if your luggage is delayed, the time that you're going to need a good pair of shoes is the first 5 to 7 days. If your luggage is delayed and you don't have that, it's not going to be a pleasant experience trekking in a rainforest in flip-flops. So just keep that in mind. And then, yeah, pre-trip excursions in Tana, if you're arriving a few days early into Antananarivo. When your local guide picks you up, they'll be able to tell you any local markets that are happening at that time, if there are any events that are on, anything like that, and they'll be able to tailor make something to you at an additional cost. So you just chat to them, they'll sort out the hotel, and you can go on a day excursion to Botanical Gardens, to the capital, to go have a look at some of the historic areas in Tana, or you can just choose to relax close to the hotel. Okay, I think that is all on my list, Sunny. You've got 8 minutes. That's better than I did last time.
Thank you so much. That was very thorough. And I feel very jealous of anybody who has the opportunity to join you in Madagascar in the next year or so. It's so high on my list. We do have some great questions though, so let's kind of run through them. Can you talk about swimming pools? How many lodges that you're going to be staying at have an opportunity for swimming?
Mansadia has a swimming pool. Relais de Lorraine has a swimming pool. Jardin de Roy has a swimming pool. Anjajavi has a pool, but you're on the beach, so you've got the beach there too. The only place that doesn't have a pool, and we're not really there for very long, is Seatum or Thermal at Ranamafana. We're only there for one full day, and that day we leave at breakfast and we come back at dinner. So there's no real downtime there, but all the other lodges have got pools.
Okay. Can you talk about any type of biting insects or bugs that people can expect, and are vaccinations required?
No vaccine required unless you're coming from an East African country. So if you're flying through from Tanzania or from Kenya, then you're going to have a yellow fever. but no vaccinations required as of Madagascar. But again, that's something I cannot say yes or no to. I can only advise. So definitely speak to a travel doctor. But biting insects, mosquitoes, certain times of the year in certain places, and then leeches. So leeches in the rainforest if it's damp and it's wet,
Okay.
and then mosquitoes.
And do you need a visa for Madagascar?
Yes, you do. If you go, you can go onto just Google Madagascar online visa, and you can get that ahead of time. You've got to do it at least a week before travel, so you can't do it like sort of 2 or 3 days before. You've got to do it a week out. But you can also get one on arrival. It just the if you get it online ahead of time, it just speeds up your process when you get it. Which reminds
Great.
me, I need to write that down on my to-do list.
Can you talk a little bit about the temperatures during the day versus during the night? Is there much of a swing or is it pretty consistent?
It depends on the time. So June, July, and August is cool mornings. So you're looking at like in the 60s, but it'll warm up into the 80s in the middle of the day, and then October, November, you're probably not gonna. It's not gonna be less than about in the low to mid 70s, and then it can warm up to the 90s and the low hundreds. But you can have a cool day in Ranamafana where it's 60 degrees in the morning, and then 2 days later you're down in Zombetsi in the southwest, and it's 95 degrees in the middle of the day. So the temperature varies not just in the season, but also in the trip. But typically, I would say it doesn't get much colder than low 60s, and it's not going to get much higher than the high 90s in the time that we're there. That's one of the reasons why we don't travel after November or early December, is because it just gets too hot.
And is there a time of the year with fewer mosquitoes?
Um, Probably June, July, and August, but there's still a chance of there being mosquitoes. So in a rainforest, if it's humid and it's wet, there's a chance of mosquitoes. But like in the southwest, when we're at Asalu, they don't even have mosquito nets on the windows, or you leave your window open to get fresh air. That's the air conditioning of the room. So there are mozzie nets around most of the beds, or fly screens across the doors. But then your least chance of mosquitoes is probably going to be June, July, and August.
Okay. And for photographers, how much need do you see for bringing a tripod?
Um, Monopods are great for the rainforest walks, because a lot of the time you're shooting directly up, or at least at a higher angle. A tripod, it's always great to have, but if you're worried about weight restriction, then that'll be one of the first things most people leave behind. But if you're really interested in star photography, it's definitely a must. You're not going to be able to do too much star photography, or at least not very well, without a tripod. So if you're really interested in star photography, it's a definite must. If not, then it's well, if you've got room, might as well bring it and see if you can use it. But if you're worried about weight, it's probably one of the first things that most people leave behind.
Hmm. What are the chances of seeing a fossa?
So, Anjajavi, who we've got a really good relationship with, they have a FUSA reintroduction program, and they've also got a few of them that are radio collared. So, when we're there, they are doing any research on them, or they've caught one to change a collar or anything, we're often invited to be a part of that. But seeing one in the wild, I've seen one once, and it was at Andrew Jarvie, and it had a collar. We weren't tracking it. We just stumbled upon it, but they're very rare. They're very shy, and they're quite a persecuted animal because they're prolific chicken hunters. So they break into chicken coops at night and they'll kill everyone. They'll kill a whole coop full of chickens. So locals don't like them very much. So they're very sharp. But there's always a chance. You never know, but pretty low chances.
Well, that is the last question we have today. So I will hand it back to you for closing comments.
Awesome. Thanks, Sunny. Thanks again to NADHAB for giving us this platform to share these incredible trips and places and interesting facts with. And thank you to all of you for tuning in today. Hopefully, or maybe I'll see one of you in a trip later on this year or next year. And once again, thanks to Sunny for being a wonderful host as always. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you again. Like I said, this is just at the top of my list. So I hope to see you there someday. But in the meantime, I want to thank everybody who tuned in. Please join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nadhab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everybody.